you hear me?
Yeah.
Now?
Could you?
Maybe.
Oh, sorry, I was just looking for.
Now? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, I'll try to talk loud. We don't have a lot of, unfortunately, these are going to be 10-minute introductions, and we now have a lot more working groups that we need to get through. So we're going to start as soon as we can get the talks put online. But on Thursday at the kidney section, there'll be lunch. Yeah. Thursday working lunch, we'll have a lot of time for discussion, and hopefully we'll be able to develop some new ideas, potential new working groups, tweaks to the classification that might want to be considered, and all of that will be at lunch on Thursday. This session will just serve as an introduction to what the working groups are currently working on, where everybody is. For those of you who will introduce the leaders of the different working groups, for those of you particularly who are new to this process, you might want to contact directly the individual working group leaders if you would like to join those groups.
So there will be no questions because we're reading time, 10 minutes per working group. Take your notes and questions, and then on Thursday during the discussion session, we can bring those all up. We have a lot of time there. So, and also the presenters, if you have slides, once we have slides, do we have slides? We just need to go through this, right? Because as what Mark said, is we have 9 working groups, I think. 7,
10.
10. Very active. And we do not have enough seats, I see. I can sell this chair for a small fee of $50. Do I hear more than 50? Canadian. So it's $250 US. Okay, look, that we are not losing more time. So I wanted to give an update on where the Banff Foundation is, what the Banff Foundation is for those people who have not been in Banff meetings. So what is Banff actually? And also some announcement what is coming from Banff for the next couple of years. And some transparency around what the Banff Foundation as the body behind it is a non-for-profit organization registered in Switzerland. It has a board. There's some changes to the board. Had a list of board members and how it works and how we organize the meetings and where we generate revenue, because you can't be a member of the Banff Society or something. The only revenue generation to organize things like publishing the meeting reports as open source and all that is through some revenue we get from these meetings organized now mostly in synergy with other partner societies. Of course, we also have no secretariat other than my inbox. There is nobody else really organizing anything. Kim is doing the website mostly. There's Kim Solez, who essentially initiated with Lorraine. I don't know if she was chairing the other session. Is Lorraine, are you in the room? Yeah, there's Lorraine Rakusen, who both founded the Banff. We have Bob Colvin here, who integrated the CCTT organization. So all the people who started this process are mostly in the room. That was almost 30 years ago. And the next Banff meeting in 2021 will be in Banff, which is actually a city. It's not Dr. Banff, the classification, as I thought when I started in the field. Do we have presentations? No. Look, this is typical for, I have not been at a Banff meeting where the working session didn't start with that chaos. Usually Kim was bringing his own laptop. And you remember in Paris when it totally crashed? And I think we were playing Jeopardy in between, waiting until we had enough time. So, here we are. And we had good food in Paris. We will go back to Paris as well for that reason. In 2023, we will be back in Paris. Is Danny here? Danny Lotz? Okay. So, because that will be a big party for him. And for Christophe Legendre, who have been part of the Banff process from the beginning. And then in 2025, we will go to Leuven in Belgium. Martin will host us there, Martin Mason. And we'll cancel that in. We'll save your air miles for those events. Okay, I'm running out of text. Oh, it's mine. I briefly have to show two slides. Okay, here we are, updated. They're all in duplicate, whatever that means. Okay, whatever. Yeah, I take whatever is there. Okay, so I went through this. No, that's the wrong presentation. I will not do that. Yeah. So you have twice my second presentation, but not my first presentation. Oh, there, here it is. Okay, good. Look, stress is good for you. So that's the Banff process. Quickly, as you know, every 2 years is the meeting, the classification. So we're here to really work on this then, this afternoon in the kidney session, and then on Thursday in the discussion, to identify the gaps and the needs for update of the classification. And Mark moderates for most of that. This is the structure of the Banff Foundation, as I said, with the organ groups, and people are responsible for other organ sessions, which are taking place also in the afternoon, in parallel today and over the next 2 days. There will be changes to the Banff Board of Trustees in 2020 coming. Lorraine, actually, am I allowed to say that? Is stepping down from Banff after almost 30 years. So thank you very much, Lorraine, for everything you've done. We were replaced by Cynthia Drachenberg. I saw Cynthia is in the back there. Raise your hand. You have to raise your hand very high because Cynthia, you're not very tall. She has been leading the pancreas group forever. Will serve on the board. Also, Kim's term as chairman of the Banff Foundation is coming to an end. Thank you, Kim, but Kim will be around for the next 30 years. And I will assume that role and continue serving this group. So we know, you can look this online. The Banff working groups are actually the backbone of what we do here, and we'll go through this quickly today. This is where we spend the money and what the money is. For example, last reference guide paper published by Candice and Jan was made open source from the beginning, so these are the funds where they go. This meeting is in partnership with ASHI, for those who have not noticed. It's a pretty big meeting. It's an experiment we have never done before, doing such a big meeting. Thank you to all the sponsors supporting this. It took 2 years to organize it, contracts, program. Alex and Mark did most work for the program. There were more than 1,200 delegates, and never seen so many people at a Banff working group update, to be honest. So one novelty is what we will launch. So the Banff meeting is every 2 years, and in between, we got a lot of requests of saying, people, look, the complication is, the classification is so complicated, we need a teaching course. And not only for junior faculty members, but also for people who are not primarily doing just transplant pathology or who do one organ and want to experience the other organ. So we organized for next year for the first time a Banff workshop, which is hands-on digital slides and really the faculty explaining you from the horse's mouth how to interpret the classification. So I will not be allowed to teach in that course, but Mark is probably the main source. And it will be in Banff, right? That's Banff, Alberta, Rocky Mountains. It's a 2-day course, and we have a date, October 2nd to 3rd, 2020. and we will distribute them widely, but for those who are interested or where you have trainees or staff, please spread the word. So as I said, thank you for Kim and Lorraine and other people who really were instrumental in this, like Phil Halloran, Bob Colvin, Danny Glass, funding from the Roche Organ Research Transplant Foundation, which started the foundation. And then we're almost 30 years. And the next meeting in 2021 will be in Banff, here in the Brown Building in the center. This is the hall where the very first Banff meeting was. What month the Banff meeting was? Oh, will be October, right, Kim?
Yeah, 4th to the 7th.
4th to the 7th of October 2021. First Banff meeting had 11 participants. Maybe we get it up to 13 for the next meeting. So I'm really ambitious for that. So that was it. As introduction, just keep the dates. We can also distribute them. Somebody can tweet them, not me, but somebody might be able. So the first presentation, Mark.
Okay, so Marjan Afrouzian is going to talk about thrombotic microangiopathy. This is a difficult and somewhat controversial topic, as we heard a little bit about yesterday at Kansas State presentation.
I just pulled that. Yeah.
Good afternoon. To start presenting the report, I would like first of all to mention about the methodology that we have used for our working group, which is the Delphi methodology. This is a methodology that has in view a few notions. One of them is to be democratic with low tension and animosity among the participants, to provide accurate data, be fast in performing, and also at low cost. Now, if we ask all the people who are in this room to get together to make a consensus about thrombotic microangiopathy and renal allograft, we need to imagine what would happen. And the best way that this could be addressed is through the Delphi methodology. So you, as participants, would be asked to bring to the table all the lesions that you would think would make you help make the diagnosis of TMA, or make you help rule out the diagnosis of TMA. And that's how the round one is formed in Delphi methodology. After receiving all your input, the co-chairs who are playing the role of moderators would be collecting the data, going through a vetting process, basically eliminating all the redundancies, and to represent to you those data in round two. In round two, you would decide which basically which criteria you would like to vote for it, and any criteria that has a vote above a threshold, let's say a threshold of 80%, would pass, and all the other criteria would be dropped. And that's how the round three is formed. And this process is going to go for 9 rounds until at the end of the 9th round, you would have the minimum diagnostic criteria for TMA. Round 6 would be the first round with validation, where we would expose our participants with cases, and the participants would basically validate their own criteria against those cases. So let's start with how we did that. We had 23 participants. nephropathologists with more than 3 years of diagnostic experience with transplant TMA from around the world. These are the first 4 categories that they basically suggested to us in round 1, and each category we basically these 4 classes, which were made into 12 categories. And now, for the sake of time, I cannot go over every single category. I'm just going to mention about the pathology categories. For example, category 1, LM plus positive, were the lesions that would help the participant make the diagnosis of TMA. Category 2, LM negative, were lesions that helped the participant rule out the diagnosis of TMA. And so on with every single other category, the same thought process is followed. Here I'm showing analysis of more than 33,000 data entries that we had by the end of the 6th round, which was our validation. As you might appreciate, we started with 338 lesions that were suggested and narrowed it down at the end of the 6th round by 261 criteria. This is a snapshot of the round 6. Only in the red rectangle you will see the pathology criteria. I'm not talking here, I'm not showing the clinical, laboratory, and differential diagnosis. In R6, where we validated our criteria, we had a TMA group of cases. We had a total of 37 cases. 29 of them were in the TMA group and represented basically the daily struggle that we have with this lesion. For example, we had 12 cases of classic TMA, 1 case of diffuse TMA, cases of focal TMA with ABMR, acute and chronic TMA, a case that was early TMA, one that was TMA only by electron microscopy, and so on, as you might appreciate in the list. In the no TMA group, we had a case of suspicious for ABMR, we had a case of TCMR, and as you might appreciate, even glomerular nephritis with deposits, recurrent MPGN, and recurrent IgA nephropathy. These are cases that we, on a daily basis, have problem when we are dealing with. This slide shows the diagnostic agreement levels. As you might appreciate, in this column, we have 70% of our participants that have agreed on 76% of the cases. This is not a bad result. Here, you might appreciate only 4 cases were agreed by 100% of the people. Criteria per category are shown here. In round 6, we have 15 LM positive, 2 LM negative, or 2 IF positive, 2 IF negative, and so on, and 14 differential diagnoses. These have to become smaller, these criteria, in the next few rounds. At this point, I'm sure you all want to know what are those 61 criteria, but for the sake of the time, I won't be able to discuss them here. We have a poster number 209, where all the criteria are shown, and you're welcome to come to the poster and discuss. Here are our 17 light microscopy criteria. I just want to mention in this slide that there were some issues that our participants had during these 6 rounds that surfaced one by one. One of them was the tendency of categorizing the criteria into acute versus chronic. So there is this tendency that our participants try to categorize the criteria. The other one is an emerging problem. I would call it not problem, but maybe a good finding, and that is the fact that antibody-mediated rejection in many areas came out as a confounding lesion. We all know that antibody-mediated rejection creates TMA in some cases, but we also have cases in which there is no TMA, but antibody-mediated becomes a differential diagnosis to TMA. So that is highlighted in yellow here in criteria 2B, and will need more discussion and be resolved in either this cohort or in the future studies. The same thing here in IF criteria entering R7. We have again the mitigation of C40 positivity that is creating some intellectual challenge for our group. 11 criteria for clinical, 10 for lab criteria. We do not have any genetic criteria entering R7 because our cases did not have any genetic information provided. Here is our floating differential diagnosis. Again, as you might appreciate, antibody-mediated rejection and whether acute or chronic is a confounding lesion. Reasons for discrepancies were many. When TMA was associated with ABMR, we were missing it. When it was focal, when the microthrombi were small, when the TMA was only on EM, it was missed. And so on. Here we have the list of how we underdiagnose TMA. And on the other side, when we are overdiagnosing TMA. These are the list of the lesions. In conclusion, at the end of R6, we narrowed the criteria down from 338 to 61. We categorized them in 12 categories. The result of R7 are now being analyzed. The 8th and 9th round are pending. 3/4 of our participants reached consensus on 3/4 of cases. Reasons for overdiagnosis and underdiagnosis have been identified. And the final thing that I would like to say is that the final TMA working group results will be available for comparison with data generated by other groups that are working on renal native or transplant TMA to generate a final consensus document that we call consensus of the consensus groups. At this point, I cannot finish this presentation without acknowledging the immense work of our group. It can't be overemphasized, 7 rounds in a matter of 2 years, and it has been a real honor for me to work with this group. At the end of 2 years, while we are finishing the work in 2 more rounds, what remains between us is a friendship, which I think is probably the most beautiful thing that we have in our group.
Next we're going to talk about recurrent glomerular disease, not a Lapchikar, it's rated by NASCO from Hopkins. Now, which one is it?
Thanks so much for coming. I will see you in 2 years. Yeah, cool.
Yours is not here. Tuesday. That's different. That's a different. They do lower presentation? No, they do lower in the speaker. Yours is also here. No, yours is not here. Okay, what's the next one? You have missed me.
Is highly sensitized?
No.
HIV.
Class is here. ECMR, that's also not.
ECMR,
Oh, we have Becker's here. Right, of us here. What a mess. Who's responsible for this meeting? Yeah. Yeah. So you have a USB stick. Okay, so you moderate, I'm the AP.
Yours is there. Are you speaking in this session? What your
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the organizers for giving us a chance to engage you on our working group in this probably less than 5 minutes. So I have nothing to disclose except I'm a transplant nephrologist, so all the pathology you can ask Dr. Mariasco. Thus the objectives of my talk will revisit our goals of this group, and I'll show you the structure of our work and then what data we have so far and what next steps and the future work. I want to say GN is very significant, very important. It's still very important. I know there are a lot of talks about rejections, but GN is really critical because after we solve, hopefully, the rejection issues with this Banff meetings, GN still needs a lot of work, so that's why we're trying to start now. There's very limited data on GN post-transplant. So that's the scope of our work. We try to establish pathology guidelines for pathologists and clinicians. And we'd like to understand the correlation between the GN findings on the biopsy and other findings on the biopsies. And we want to correlate and predict the outcome relying on the pathology and some clinical manifestations. And hopefully correlate with some biomarkers, some genetic variations. So when we launched this a couple of years ago, there were a lot of enthusiasm. There were a lot of people said, yeah, we want to contribute. And we ended up with 10 centers, which is still good. We have some data from those centers, and some people are working on their data entry. So hopefully soon we'll have some results. So we started 3 years ago in 2016. We set the stage to this work, and then we progressed. And now in the setting of sharing some data and hopefully finalizing our outcome. So those are the main questions we try to answer. What's the recurrence rate? What's the manifestation? If you have FSGS and rejection, how does that look like? And what's the clinical and pathology characteristics of native and post-transplant? And we're trying to understand what exactly you need to diagnose those GNs. So this is the set for how we work these questions. And we want to start with the native kidneys, and then we want to go to the transplant. We have few clinical manifestations or characteristics we need to understand, and also we need to find all those pathology characteristics in GN. And then after that, we want to analyze those. We want to understand what the frequency of those GN. We want to see the predictive values. And we, of course, at the end, we're going to have registry to have all those data. Of course, anybody, pathology and clinician, can pull from those data. So just briefly, scoop of the work in our center. In 16 years, we have about 15% of the patients have some type of GN. And the one in the blue here, unknown cause of the end-stage kidney disease, and we really think a lot of those people have GN as the cause. And the majority of our patients have FSGS, and some of them have IgA, and the rest have some types of GN. And the recurrence is very high, and we really think is probably much higher. We did not capture all of the recurrence, but some of the GN recur much higher than others. So this is I presented earlier, and we have now data, full data on about 105 patients who received 122 clinical, full clinical, and pathology data. And we noticed that the recurrence of IgA nephropathy happens early, but happens at any time. And it's really significant. It's not what we understood early, that IgA can recur as a deposit. No, it's a real disease after transplant. And you can see the manifestation. You can see presenting, and you see the full blown of IgA that needs treatment. Otherwise, you're going to lose the allograft. And we correlated those IgA findings with other Banff findings. And we found that if you have presenting GN, you have very high likely to have very high score of TI. And the same with presenting and the FSGS with IgA nephropathy associate significantly with high EFTA and associate with high level of glomerular sclerosis if you have IgA and FSGS on the light microscopy. So far we have almost 1,000 cases we identified in those 10 centers. I mentioned our center's experience, and Dr. Ferris from Emory promised he's going to send us data on 48 patients. And Dr. Barron from Canada, from McGill, she found 200 cases in their program, and hopefully we can get those data soon. Dr. Nguyen analyzed his data in 180 patients from a couple of years ago, and we're going to combine it with our data. And from Commonwealth University, Dr. Kidd found 59 cases of IgA nephropathy. And Dr. Patel from Columbia, he had about 100 cases. And Dr. Zales with Dr. Colvin, they promised to send us their data on 30 recurrent IgA. So very large number, hopefully we combine those data together very soon. I'm going to move to FSGS. And from our center, we have identified 160. We have full data collection on those patients, clinical data and pathology data. And a brief analysis in their pathology, we found significant correlation between EFTA and FSGS on light microscopy, which is very important. That tells you, when you have FSGS on light microscopy, they may progress very rapidly because EFTA has already started to happen. And we found that the side effacement can be in IgA nephropathy and FSGS, but of course more prevalent in FSGS. And mesangial expansion was seen in both of them, so that p-value was not different. So you see mesangial expansion of both those lesions. From McGill, Dr. Barron found her data from early until 2007 and identified about 34 patients. She had full clinical and pathology findings, and she's reviewing her recent patients on 75 cases of FSGS, and she found looked at the outcome and the clinical data and looking at the pathology data. From Dr. Ferris, we have 40 cases. And from Dr. Al-Hamad from St. Louis, he sent us 10 cases on recurrence FSGS. And more from Commonwealth on FSGS and from Wisconsin. And Dr. Rosales has 10 cases of recurrent FSGS. We hope to combine those together very soon. So what's the next step? In 3 months, we'll get all the data together, combine them, and then in 3 more months, we're going to analyze those data, and hopefully we'll finalize our manuscript. So the future work, we want to collect more data on other GN. We need to include more centers because a lot of centers are really interested in this work. We want to create registry, and we want to correlate GN with real Banff criteria and see if makes any difference, and correlate the pathology with other markers. We hear a lot about donor-free cell DNA, DSA, SUPAR, other markers that correlate probably with the outcome and pathology lesions. And the hope is to improve the outcome of those patients with GN, found early detection, prevention, and more therapies. And with that, I would like to thank the organizer and our group.
Okay, we have a couple of talks here. Lynn, you're next, right?
Yeah, Lynn Cornell, Harry Shimstock from the highly sensitized working group will be next.
Yeah, here, yours is here. Got it. On the desktop.
Yeah, on the desktop.
That's the one on the desktop.
Yeah, this is it.
Okay.
Okay. So we are both here to report on the progress of the Banff highly sensitized working group. At least that is the old name, highly sensitized. Now we've kind of evolved into this new name called Antibody-Mediated Injury Working Group. Overall, when this group was founded, we wanted to address these issues to determine the definitions and practices of clinicians, to tissue typing lab directors and pathologists in evaluating and managing sensitized kidney transplant candidates and recipients. We wanted to standardize the definitions related to management of sensitized transplant patients and to inform the development of inclusion criteria and endpoints for clinical trials. We have a number of working group members from all over the globe, so thank you very much to the working group members. We initially conducted a survey to determine the current interpretation of the Banff ABMR classification system. And this survey was conducted prior to the Banff 2017, just prior to the Banff 2017 revision. And now we have a follow-up survey that's currently active. I'll give you the link for that. We're also embarking on a broad literature review of different definitions for HLA incompatible transplants. So the goals of the first survey were to determine how Banff nomenclature is interpreted in practice by clinicians and renal pathologists, to examine how patients with ABMR are managed in clinical practice. The results of this survey were published in American Journal of Transplantation in January of 2019, and we also had an AST online journal club that was hosted by the Transplant Diagnostics Community of Practice to draw attention to the issues that were raised in the survey, and that was done in December of 2018. The archive is available online if you're interested. So this first survey included 6 clinical pathologic ABMR scenarios. The details of these and the survey questions are in that published paper, so you can look that up. But basically it had a range of acute versus chronic ABMR, de novo DSA versus preformed DSA, C4D positive, C4D negative. And these were meant to reflect a variety of clinical pathologic experiences that clinicians and pathologists came into contact.
So we had about 100 respondents from about 100 transplant clinicians fill out this survey. This would be both surgeons and nephrologists and approximately 80 renal pathologists. And again, we had survey respondents from across the globe. And interestingly, what we found is that in the community, the practicing nephrologist and pathologist assigned a diagnosis different than the way Banff intended about 30% of the time. And again, we gave clinical scenarios that you would commonly see in practice. And we think that this was, actually we found that this was important because the diagnosis that was assigned by the transplant clinician influenced the treatment choices that they made. So this is an important issue of how Banff is actually interpreted and used in practice. And we also found that the vast majority of clinicians treat ABMR or would treat ABMR in the settings that we presented, whether it be active or even very chronic, despite a paucity of evidence. And this is what we determined some factors that were associated with these discrepant diagnoses. So among pathologists, the main factor associated with the difference in diagnosis was the size of the transplant center. So pathologists practicing in smaller transplant centers were more likely to have a different diagnosis. But among the pathologists, at least, there was no association with what the CG score was, allograft dysfunction, C4D, where they were located, or even whether it was de novo or pre-existing antibody. And this is somewhat in contrast to the way the factors associated with this differing diagnosis among the clinicians. So in this group, C4D positivity influenced how ABMR was diagnosed. Again, if the clinician was practicing at a smaller center, they were more likely to have a discrepant diagnosis. And interestingly, among the clinicians, whether the patient in this scenario had allograft dysfunction or not influenced their diagnosis. But in the nephrologist group, there was no association with the CG score, de novo DSA, or the location of their center. So in conclusion, we felt that, after interpreting the results, the term acute was confusing, and this was actually removed from the 2017 classification. And that in general, clinicians often fail to recognize the chronic elements of antibody-mediated rejection. And also clinicians are really influenced by whether C4D is positive or negative. And if C4D is negative, clinicians tend to think this means it's a chronic antibody-mediated rejection, even if there's no pathologic features of chronicity, such as transplant glomerulopathy. Now, although we found that our findings were interesting, we were left with more questions than we did from the beginning, and this has led to a follow-up survey to understand these factors further, and this survey is currently active. We have received over 100 responses from clinicians and nearly 100 responses from pathologists for this follow-up survey, and again, we have international representation, but I ask you today if you could participate and provide even more input. So we also have some cards that we'll pass out, but here is the survey link, and I want to remind you that it is case sensitive. We do have some preliminary results from this follow-up survey, and importantly, clinicians and pathologists tend to feel the same way about Banff, at least in this follow-up survey. Only 8% of respondents felt that there were no problems with the current classification. But again, this is not to bash Banff, it's more, this is a quality improvement project, right? We all want to just get better, so that's kind of our goal. About 20% of respondents felt that Banff was difficult to use. The vast majority of respondents, nearly 60%, felt that the dichotomous nature of Banff doesn't really reflect the disease spectrum, and that's problematic. There's problems with these inflammatory changes when there's no C4D or no DSA. We don't really know what to do with that. And about 20% of respondents thus far think that Banff changes too frequently, so we're using a lot of different Banff. So again, I'll encourage you to fill out that survey to help make this better. The other project that a subgroup of our working group is working on is to help standardize the definitions for incompatible transplantation. This is led by Ruth Sapir, and she has worked with her librarians from McGill, but also the librarians from Johns Hopkins, and they're working to kind of expand on what the STAR group has done and look at those different definitions for incompatibility and correlate that with some outcomes. And again, the goal is to standardize the way that we talk, standardize definitions. So with that, I want to again thank the many working group members. Again, we have international representation, and our working group is unique because we not only have pathologists, but we have nephrologists like myself, but also HLA laboratory directors providing input. And again, there's a survey link, and if you're interested in joining us, I have my email. So thank you.
Okay, so next will be HIV working groups. Serena Baniasco.
Alex says they're all talks. Glasgow Banff, that's you. Got it. Somewhere.
Thanks for the invitation, and I will give an update on the HIV positive to HIV positive transplantation that was proposed at the last edition of Banff. And what I will do is essentially focus on the HOPE initiative in the United States that that have dealt with this new type of transplantation. As I have a disclosure, as a background, we know that HIV positive donor to HIV positive recipient transplantation has been successful in South Africa, but in the United States that has been banned since the 80s, and there was a new law that the HOPE Act that was passed by Congress in 2013 and became law in 2015, where this type of transplant was legalized, but only, at least in the first phase, in the context of an approved research protocol. And that's how the HOPE in Action prospective study of HIV positive to HIV positive kidney transplantation was set up as basically a study to determine a non-inferiority of kidney transplant from HIV positive donor to HIV positive recipient compared to a transplant from HIV negative donors. And this study is articulated in two phases. There was a pilot prospective study that was essentially set up in 2016 to determine the feasibility and the logistic and the infrastructure to conduct this type of transplant in the United States, which was followed by another more structured project that was a multi-center project that started in 2017 and is supposed to go up to 2022. For both projects, the PI was Christine Durant at Johns Hopkins. So the primary endpoint of the study is time to a composite of death, graft loss, rejection, AIDS-defining illness, HIV breakthrough, and HIV persistent virologic failure. The secondary endpoints include graft function, analysis of renal disease, including HIV-associated renal diseases, HIV disease progression, development of antiretroviral resistance, incidence of infection, other surgical and vascular complication, viral-related malignancy, and the prevalence of donor-specific antibodies at 1 year according to determination of the central. This, I will mostly present preliminary data on the pilot studies. The HOPE study, the U01 study, it's really beginning to provide data to the central lab, and it will take a while for them to be available and analyzed. So in the pilot study, we had multiple centers participating. Here you have about 16, but more centers have agreed to participate in the meantime. And they are from East Coast, Central States, and Western States. So the study design was basically aimed at performing 80 kidney transplants from HIV positive donor to HIV positive recipient, and 80 kidney transplants from HIV negative donors to HIV positive recipient. And on the right are listed the inclusion criteria for the donor, for the HIV positive donor. That had to be confirmed infection, either by medical record, HIV antibody, or nucleic acid test. No evidence of active opportunistic infection. And as far as viral load, any level was basically acceptable as long as the recipient was prescribed antiviral treatment. For the recipient, there had to be documented HIV infection. Only adults above 18 years of age were allowed in the study. There had to be no active opportunistic infection. The CD4 T-cell count had to be above 200. HIV viral load less than 50 copies. And of course, there had to be willingness to comply with all medication, and the patient Also, a few other information as far as at the beginning, the plan was only to include a deceased donor, either HIV positive or HIV negative, but later on, living donor were admitted, and so far as September, there have been only 2 recipients receiving organ from a living donor. One was HIV negative, one was HIV positive. And the HIV positive living donors are followed under separate protocol. For hepatitis C, transplant from hepatitis C positive donor were allowed initially only for patients who were recipients who were HIV positive, hepatitis C positive, but later only also those that were hepatitis C negative. And for as far as antiviral and immunosuppressive treatment, that has been left to the protocol adopted by each individual center, including induction and maintenance immunotherapy. And the follow-up is expected to be at least for 4 years. In the course of the study, there will be collection of blood, urine, and lymph node, as well as kidney. And the collection will occur for whole blood pre-transplant, and transplant 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, and then yearly up to 4 years. The urine will be collected pre-transplant, at transplant, 6 months and 1 year. 1 lymph node from donor and 1 from recipient at transplant. And for the kidney, there will be protocol biopsy pre-implant of donor, 6 months, 1 year, and then of course indication biopsy. So for the UO1, the second bigger multi-center trial, after the kidney biopsy have been evaluated and the report that had been issued from the local pathologist, the study expects to have a stained biopsy slide and stained section plus digital images of IF and EM and a core of flash fruits and tissue for research sent to the core lab, which is a central lab at Johns Hopkins. And they will be stored and eventually analyzed. Now, of note, in the pilot phase of the study, this was optional, so basically the only center who sent that slides was Emory, and I thank Brad for that. But this, in the UO1, it's mandatory that the biopsy material will be sent to the central lab. So, as far as the pilot phase, we had 75 patients enrolled, median age 52. We had 52 males, 23 females, 62 blacks, 10 white, 2 Asian, and 1 other race. Of the 75 patients enrolled, we had only partial record in 9 patients. We had 74 deceased donors, and we have now 2 living donors. As far as the donor HIV status, we had 31 negative, 22 positive, and false positive, which basically either had no record of HIV infection or there was discrepancy between antibody and nucleic acid testing. The induction and immunosuppression protocol were different depending on the center. We had most of the patients with steroid induction, 49 basilicsimas, immunoglobulin in 23, and complex in 2. So, as far as the event, we had graft failure, 1 graft failure, HIV breakthrough, and opportunistic infection 5, PK viremia in 15, and rejection in 15. Most of the rejection, most of the biopsy occurred within 3 months, and here is a list of the findings. The bound score were generally relatively mild. We had 11 patients with borderline diagnosis and 12 TCMR and mixed ABMR. So in this project, the incidence of rejection was higher compared to South Africa so far. And this is a table summarizing the breakdown on the type of rejection. And as you can see, this was basically there was no difference depending on the donor HIV status, positive, negative, or false positive. And 12 patients with a basiliximab induction had rejection compared to 2 that were induced by thyroglobulin. So the preliminary result suggests that rejection remains a concern and may be related to the type of immunosuppression protocols. For the HOPE-UO1, there is now also a possibility of enrolling patients for liver transplant. And up to May 2019, we had 241 kidney consented and a total of 51 patients transplanted. And for the liver, 12 patients consented and 8 transplant performed. And I wish to thank all the team at Johns Hopkins as well as those at the participating center. Thank you.
So Alex, nobody's going to talk about clinical trials.
So before I start, there is an opening working group which is called the Speaker Ready Room. If any one of you is interested, that you can upload the slides and everything. I think it's something mandatory. So when Michael and Mark designed, this working group session, Michael said that you have to do 2 things, Alex. The first is to speak no more than 10 minutes, which I will do. The point number 2 is to always put the working group into the context of use, meaning that if this working group is something helpful for Banff, is Banff able to help the working group? And at the end of the day, does the working group fit well with the Banff expectations? So what I'm going to be talking about this Banff working group on surrogate endpoint are the progress and also the developments. So as you know, this is not a traditional working group because we are not expecting here to improve the Banff classification, which is primarily a classification for diagnosis. And so the idea came back in 2017 that we could also use the Banff classification and the histopathological lesions to better understand whether those lesions carry a prognostic value. So what we wanted to do was to get rid with the error of the past, thinking that we can just use the hard endpoints, for the clinical trials, or that you can just measure eGFR like we used to do in the past 30 years, or do a eGFR slope and it will solve everything and be accurate in every single situation. So really the idea of the working group was to think about a more multidimensional appraisal of what are the driving force of the kidney transplant prognosis and how histopathology regarding activity and damage could be independent factors for risk prognostication. So the group is led by myself and more recently I'm really pleased to have as a co-leader Martin Essens from Leuven. And we have 3 aims. The first aim was that to use the Banff classification and to foster collaborations through the Banff network, which I call friends and family, which I think we are all here in this room today, to further validate integrated prognostic system. The point number 2 was, as I said, the histopathology and the multidimensional integration. And the point number 3, which we thought was important as a Banff community, was that Banff could also stand with agencies like FDA or EMA and do this crosstalk with agencies and societies like ESOT also and ATC. So as you know, one of the first aim, and I will be presenting just one slide, is that we use Banff and the Banff friends and family to participate in the iBox story, which was basically that we generated a prognostic algorithm and we needed to externally validate that in probably less informed data set, but different data set and in other systems which are actually showing some differences and heterogeneities regarding a lot of things like allocation process or the use of immunosuppressive drug. And so I think that we achieve a big goal because we have now 18 centers and more than 10 centers who are part of the external validation process of the iBox story. So you can see here, which is a summary of the paper. And also, I think that one point that I would like to make very clear is that
I'm not saying anything.
yeah, okay. So I can just talk like that. You hear me?
No.
No.
Okay. No. So no, I think that a very important component was the fact that we struggled with this prognostic model to integrate histopathology. We did not struggle. Actually, the model was able to find with a clear consistency that those parameters like IFTA, GPDC, INT were driving forces of long-term allograft prognostication, not to say that they were as important as GFR or DSA or the factors, but what we found in the model, and the model was the key parameters that you can use in clinical practice or in clinical trials to project every single patient for individual long-term allograft outcome prognosis. So I think that that's one of the main milestones of this working group was to be able to find centers who are willing to send us their data, and we use the data as external validation means. So now I'm coming to the three further concrete developments, because also what Michael told me is that, Alex, if you don't have anything in mind, just close your working group. Maybe we don't need that anymore. So these are concrete developments that I would like to propose. So Michael, tell me if you're going to close this working group or not. So I think we should pursue this initiative and use the Banff schema and Banff community for moving into more validation in clinical trials. You know that in iBox paper we were able to validate in 3 randomized controlled trials that the fact that you could have used the iBox in many different clinical scenarios that could have saved time for the development of the drugs. But we want to go beyond and to show that in different scenarios, and that's what we found in AMR, TCMR, the use of Sept. These are from our own cohort where we were able to measure the iBox movement. It's part of the Prentice criteria that you show that the surrogate has to be modified by the treatment, and not only that it's modified, that this modification translates in change in outcome, meaning that very early on in the clinical trial you can capture the response to treatment. So we want to move forward, and that's a big step that we are doing now, is that we are investigating a very, very large randomized controlled trial, and that's the Transform study. It was presented in a late-breaking abstract recently at the ESOT Congress. So what we did, we took all the data from the Transform trial. It took us a lot of time to make it iBox compatible, but we were able in this trial, which actually is a non-inferiority trial, trying to project patient outcome at 12 months and 24 months after transplant, to complete draw the line of 3, 5, 7, and 10 years, prognostication and comparison between groups, and we can virtually project these clinical trials of what will be the result in a hard endpoint in 10 years, and capture the fact that they will maintain their non-inferiority, and the differences in the two groups are not that big, they are not significant, and the everolimus group has a very good graft survival. So we would like to move to these clinical trials now in this group, and for any of you who are running clinical trials, we'll be happy to participate and use the iBox system in those trials. So point number 2 is the validation in pediatrics, and we are really happy to welcome Julien Hogan. He's French, but he's working in Emory. So we have now within this working group a big initiative towards validation and to see whether those equations will fit well in the pediatric population. We are not sure, but we'll test this hypothesis in more than 9 centers, 7 in the US and 2 French transplant centers. The study sites are just listed here. And last but not least, and that's going to be my last slide, we think in this working group of being the catalyst of biomarker integration to the gold standard. In other words, we are conducting a meta-analysis. So what we try to do actually is to use the iBox as a gold standard for biomarker qualification, and we are already doing virtual parameters. It means that we are using all our equations to project whether a new fancy biomarker will add anything to what is GFR, proteinuria, time, injury, damage, and presence of DSA. So that's what we are currently doing, and I think that there is a very important development given all the biomarker candidates that are available in the literature. So it's not like competing a new biomarker versus the iBox. It's to use the iBox to see whether the biomarker, in the setting of post-transplant evaluation, has anything to add to the C statistics and to the improvement of the model. So now that I've been saying that, I think that the last slide will say that we would like to collaborate with you. We are really happy for any collaboration using our reference set for validation study. and also the grant we have on biomarkers, and we also have a platform for nanostring in Paris in collaboration with many other platforms. But dedicated to surrogate endpoint, what I'm looking for is really collaboration. So don't hesitate to drop me emails. I will be responsive, and I thank you for your attention.
Next is Jan. He will tell us the rules. And disseminate the rules. Okay, here you go.
All right, I'm going to keep this short. The Rules and Destinations Working Group, I'm speaking on behalf of course, all the working group and the co-chair, Candice Rufoss. So this is the ecosystem we are working in, the Banff classifications working in. We, of course, have big data, that is the basis for personalized medicine. And of course, we are using the Banff classification also for diagnostics and for clinical studies, as we've heard. And as Alex has shown, the Banff classification, or the histopathological and clinical data filtered through the Banff classification, will then inform big data that is underpinning personalized medicine. And at the same time, it goes the other way around. We hope that we will be able to improve the Banff classification even further with big data-driven approaches. And I think as much as we can have our differences in our diagnostic approach towards transplants, what we should be very clear about is what the Banff classification actually is. If we disagree on the Banff classification, we have this blurry point in the middle, and this whole system will be destabilized. So this is what the Banff Rules and Dissemination Working Group is about. Our aim is to collate all relevant and current content of the Banff classification of renal allograft pathology, and we've been looking from the very beginning until the most recent manuscript 2017. And we want to deliver this current content in forms relevant to the community and helpful to the community. What is not our aim, and I cannot repeat this enough, we will not change or modify the Banff classification. This is not what this is about. We are just trying to give a faithful reproduction, an easily accessible reproduction. So as a first milestone, we have achieved this. We have published this 2018 reference guide, which all of us have been working on based on 2 meetings, one in Paris and one in London. Both were very enjoyable with our colleagues. And you might have read this thing, and if you have found any mistakes or flaws, please let us know. It's very important that, because we are still owning this content, as Michael told, because he spent some of his Swiss francs on this, we can still improve on this, and we'll eventually bring this content on the website, and if you found any flaws, please help us with improving them. So how about the algorithms which are hidden in these diagnostic tables? We have the content, which is the definitions, the Banff lesion scores, and additional diagnostic parameters, some of which are even more important than Banff lesion scores, for example, acute TMA in the absence of any other cause, prior history of DSA, and so on and so on. These are the minimal data set, and from the minimal data set, those are the parameters that are used with the diagnostic algorithms to arrive at the Banff diagnostic categories 1 to 6. And we are currently working on the algorithms that if you give the minimal data set, the diagnostic categories will be spit out. As I said, this is under development. So that was the rules. Now the dissemination part. What we are also currently doing is developing a podcast based on the 2018 reference manuscript. So if you don't want to read the manuscript, the TTS will support us in bringing this online so that you can download it and watch it on your iPlayer or on your TV at home and listen to me while doing that. And then, of course, we will bring the whole content, since we still own it, onto the Banff website here, and hopefully this will increase the traffic on this website, we'll see. And then, of course, we can think about all other fancy ways of reaching you and your catering for your needs, how you apply the Banff classification, and I think the proper way forward is to do a survey on this. And for this we have one Vernon Curran from Newfoundland. He's an expert in medical education for professionals, and he's done many of these surveys with cardiologists, for example, and other groups. and he's also an expert in getting the message across. So we are really happy that he is going to help us, and we are going to ask for the areas of difficulty and what Banff endorsed product you might use for your clinical diagnostics or for your research, whether you would like a web-based diagnostic calculator, whether you would like that on mobile devices, whether you'd like benchmarking tools, a help desk, and so on and so on. And of course, we will distribute this not only to pathologists, but to other disciplines involved. So if you're a nephrologist, you are really interested in your opinion about this, whether you're an immunogeneticist or a surgeon or whatever, if you are part of the community, we really appreciate your opinion, and we want to know what you think about these plans and what your needs are. And of course, our goals for the next term, the next 2 years, will be defined by the results of the survey. Of course, the finances, because all these things to implement them the proper way, which is the most cost-effective in the long run, will involve a lot of investment in the first place. And ultimately, of course, that will have to be decided by the Banff Foundation. We will only make some recommendations. And hopefully we'll finish our working group, and we can dissolve our working group in 2021 when we have implemented all these goals. And of course, thank you to all the core working group members and the wider circle, Ruth Sapir-Pichhadze and her team, Lynn Cornell, for example, Ed Krause here at Vanya School, just to mention a few. Thanks a lot. It's really enjoyable the last years working with you. And again, if you have any concerns, issues, you want to get involved, you want to become part of this, just drop us a mail, and we're happy to welcome your ideas. Thank you.
Your email is up there for complaints about the Banff classification. So just take a screenshot and yeah.
So that's good. We're catching up a little bit on time. Next will be the TCMR working group. Margie Rendau, Volko Nikolai. Just as a prelude to this, the kidney-specific session that will be held in room 406 immediately following this meeting will also focus heavily on issues related to TCMR.
No conflicts, interests, or collusions. So our working group listed here, they put it in fine print, reduce the likelihood that there are inadvertent omissions which might be noticed. And Nikolai provided me with this summary slide as to what's happening. In 2017, we had 4 centers, 81 study patients, and there were 7 centers which had incomplete data, and now we have 9 centers, 154 study patients. Unfortunately, we have only 55 patients in control group 1, which is basically a biopsy which does not show any significant pathology, and only 41 patients in control group 2, which was intended to be patients who were doing so well that they never had to be biopsied. So we do need more cases. The charge was to define the clinical pathological features of pure TCMR, and we have published the Pittsburgh experience. Meanwhile, a number of other centers have published their experience, especially Paris, very large experience. We wanted to refine the borderline category, and that work continues. And then the third aim was to incorporate IFTA into the Banff classification that has, in a sense, already been accomplished. Now, Volker has been corresponding with some of the more refractory centers who are not providing data, and he asked me to put this cartoon up to give you an idea of how he is experiencing. So now that chronic TCMR is accepted by the Banff, it is now our task to define the process. And while we were waiting to review the data, I did a little study of my own. So these are 112 consecutive biopsies scored by Banff in 2017. The parameter scores include the total inflammation, IFTA, and the tubulitis and non-severely atrophic tubules. And the preliminary screening criteria, that is all these scores be more than 1, were satisfied in 27 biopsies. And then we started excluding known causes. So 4 were chronic active ABMR, 3 were recurrent GN, 2 were polyomyeloneuropathy. In the end, we ended up with a 16% incidence of chronic active TCMR, which is actually very close to a poster incidence from Turkey, which they said is 18%. So I do want to make a few points. The incidence of acute and active TCMR is 16%, which is very comparable to the chronic active TCMR, and it exceeds the incidence of C4D positive chronic active ABMR, which is only 4%. I haven't had a chance to look at C4D negative ABMR, but even if you multiply it by 2 times or 3 times, it is still, at least in our hands, not as common. And I have to, of course, note that this data reflects the population of non-sensitized, flow cross-match negative, ABO compatible patients. Only 10% were African American, so it's this different population. But in this population, our problem is that TCMR is more common than antibody-mediated rejection. So if you redistribute the prevalence using the diagnostic categories as a denominator, 66% of all our chronic active cases were TCMR, 15% were C4D positive chronic active ABMR. I guess you could double it or triple it because I haven't studied the C4D negative cases very carefully. 11% were recurrent GN and 7% were polyomavirus nephropathy. The distribution of histological grades, 77% were 1A, defined by T2 tubulitis, and about 20% were 1B, defined by T3 tubulitis. I did not encounter any cases of grade 2 if you insist on that criterion of inflammation being present in the intima or there being a new intima being forming. However, there were 10 biopsies which seemed to show a new onset arteriosclerosis and the inflammation wasn't there. And since we have now accepted bland arteriosclerosis as a criterion for chronic antibody-mediated rejection, I think you can argue that this deserves a similar consideration. And so this is an example. All our biopsies had at least moderate fibrosis and a total inflammation score of 2 or more. This would be an example of mild tubulitis between the atrophic tubules. We call it 1A, and this would be destructive tubulitis T3, so that's 1B. And grade 2 TCMR chronic, of course, is defined by arteriosclerosis and you must have inflammation. But I believe cases like this probably fall in the same category. If nothing else, you can call them chronic inactive as long as other causes are excluded. A response to treatment, which was essentially steroid pulses or optimizing the dose of calcineurin inhibitors or MMF. Complete response as defined by the return of serum creatinine was about 28%. Partial response is 33%, no response is 39%. These numbers are small, but they actually reflect a larger feeling that I have, having done this for many years, that about a third respond well, a third partially, and third don't. And the benefits of this treatment to long-term graft longevity are of course unknown. Those are studies which we have to do to find out what is the benefit of treating. But we do treat them routinely, so I would like to collaborate with centers who do not treat them so that we can compare outcomes. And we do have, of course, we don't always do a post-treatment biopsy, it's not necessary clinically, but we certainly have cases where inflammation within the scarred and atrophic areas clear up after steroid treatment. The reproducibility of the scoring, we are 5 pathologists in our group. I take a kidney biopsy conference every week, so I rescored stuff which was scored by others. So there was a 2-score difference in these major parameters, total I, IFTA, and T in one case out of the 18 which were classified as chronic active TCMR. There were many examples of 1-score difference, like 12 out of 18, I could have given a different score. But it would not really change anything. For example, some cases I would call IFTA of 2, I will change it to 3. In some cases, IFTA of 3, I will change it to 2. It would not make a difference to the diagnosis. In 3 instances, I changed T2 to T3, so 1A to change to 1B. Again, it's not a meaningful difference. But there was a case where I reduced the IFTA score from 2 to 1, and that took it out of the chronic TCMR category. So although the kappa values of this reproducibility appear to be terrible, and I know statisticians pounce on pathologists, but effectively you do a fairly good job, we can recognize major categories. So the causes of the variability in this grading, there are problems in defining IFTA. It's very hard when you start looking at slides actually. IFTA is always considered together, but can you call it IFTA, there's fibrosis alone, or do you need both? What will you show for cases where there's only atrophy? And these are, I think, the reasons why people can have slight disagreements. And there are, I think, major problems with integrating the percentage biopsy area with the concept of cell density, because you have to take them together into a uniform score, and transition points are a problem. From 0 to 1, from 1 to 2, they are somewhat subjective and difficult to apply, especially if the inflammation is patchy, because the human eye can't integrate multiple cores which are all varying in the degree of inflammation. And similarly, there are some difficulties in tubularity, grading tubulitis, because you have to go to the peak tubule, and then many people don't recognize disruption. They often actually call no tubulitis when there's T3 tubulitis. So to improve the reproducibility, I have the following suggestions. I think it's nice that Candice has developed a teaching set. It should be expanded. Morphometry would definitely be more accurate, but we have to need to integrate it into the same day sign out, which probably means that we will need to do very quick turnaround and immunohistochemistry for CD3, CD4, and so on. And then transcriptomic technologies have a lot of potential, but they need to be validated, and we hope to do that. Michael Mengel has that group working under him. And now, even though the chronic TCMR concept is now widely accepted by most medical centers, there are still investigators who question its existence. So I wanted to comment on that. Here's a paper from Halloran's group which ends by saying, we conclude that IFTA indication biopsies reflect recent ongoing parenchymal injury, often with concomitant antibody, but few T-cell mediated rejection. I think there are some conceptual flaws in this approach. First of all, the TCMR signature was defined in non-scarred biopsies. So if you apply it to scarred biopsies, I'm not surprised that the TCMR signature is less robust, because I believe it will be diluted by genes expressed by fibrogenesis, tubular atrophy, arteriosclerosis, tissue remodeling. So you're not expected to perform it the same way. And secondly, I would submit that the machine learning classifiers which were used to define ABMR actually utilize biopsies which many people would call mixed TCMR. So you basically discounted the TCMR that was present, and this illustrates a point, I think, that the output of machine learning classifiers can reflect the bias of a trainer. And you can use 1,000 bootstraps, or you can use an ensemble of 100 algorithms, but you cannot correct for that basic problem. And so we are looking for more cases. My nice guy approach doesn't work, so Volker suggested this is the authoritarian approach you should try. So please join us.
So Michael is next going to talk about molecular, but just to add one thing to Parmjeet's last point, IFTA is not chronic active TCMR. They are not synonymous. And I think that it was important to note that built into Banff 2017 was increased stringency so that IFTA was not equated with just with chronic active TCMR. There needs to be a certain amount of total inflammation. There needs to be tubulitis. Neither one of these was considered in that Halloran paper in AJT. So a little bit of apples and oranges.
So I'm glad Phil is not in the room. You're safe. So,
I'm never safe from the broad reach of Phil.
Of the dark force. Yeah, may the force be with you. So, 2013 Banff meeting report had a major change to our concept. We included molecular diagnostic. It opened the door to be part of the classification pending validation. It was significant discussion. You remember, for those who were there, should we include something which doesn't exist? And Banff has often done that to push the envelope, fairly successful with C4D, and then we changed it again. But that's how we progress. So, but how do we integrate it? And it's the same concept we have done for the lesions, where we have the meetings and review the data and generate consensus around what the molecular lesions are, so to say. And then Alex said for the more artificial intelligence-based prediction models, we also need to agree on what is the equation, what are the variables. So, because nothing is absolutely specific, consensus will be our starting point. And we know today, for significant work by Phil Halloran in the field, that the molecular phenotype in allografts has now well described. So there is no unknown gene, right? Yesterday somebody asked me, so what's the hope to find a new gene? I said, the microarray has all 21,000, I'm not sure what you're looking for, right? So it has been out there, and it has been tested in thousands of biopsies. I don't know, maybe there is another, but at the transcriptome level, there is probably no surprise. The molecules are coordinated. There's a large group of molecules which are associated with phenotypes, but certain genes of that group can give you the information. There is not a single gene specific for rejection. That's a bit of a bummer, but that's what it is. But a few molecules reflect the phenotype, and what we did in the last Banff meetings is we aligned essentially certain molecular phenotypes with the Banff lesions. And we have now molecular lesions. And that's all published. And Phil nicely summarized last year in his review, essentially what are the top genes associated with T-cell mediated rejection, which is the upper, the graph here, antibody-mediated rejection, mixed rejection. You see these red genes are the best T-cell mediated genes, these blue ones are the best antibody-mediated rejection genes, and then you see when you have antibody-mediated rejection cases, the red ones, the TCMRs are down here, and when you have mixed cases, both ABMR and TCMR genes are in the middle. So we know the genes, and there's lots of genes. Everybody in the room can pick your favorite gene. Then you have your own little Banff classification. But as we heard at this meeting over and over again, also in the antibody testing world, is what is the context of use for clinical validation? What is the methodological validation? So when we tested in Edmonton, and then we tested in Boston, and we tested in LA, that we measured the same way, when we once agree on what the genes are. And then what are the clinical applications and utilities? And it depends on tissue, blood, urine. The same genes have overlaps in body fluids and in the tissue. What do you want to achieve? What's your diagnostic claim? Is it increased diagnostic precision? Is it a companion diagnostic to say whether you would respond to a drug or not? These might be different genes in a different context. What diagnoses ABMR does not necessarily say that you respond to complement inhibition. And at the beginning is, are you diagnostic, are you prognostic, or are you predictive? And the literature is full of papers saying these genes are associated with the histopathology diagnosis and outcome and failure of treatment. But that could be a statistical accident, because the fact that you have ABMR and there's no treatment is the common denominator for all of those. So we are currently still in this stage where we know what is kind of going on, but we have no consensus on how to use it. And that was discussed at the last meetings, and we came up with a roadmap of knowledge gaps, of validation studies that need to be done, and some of those have been done and are underway. We also came up with a consensus gene list at the previous meeting, which was based on the published literature and other experience. However, what since happened then from the last meeting in this working group is, we identified a team which is highlighted here from various countries, which revisited this gene list and added additional information and some computational approaches of review literature, meta-analysis, and we approached the company NanoString, who has developed thematic gene panels. And what they did is, they helped us then to look all these genes up and to code them in the context of transplantation into one commercially available panel. You may have heard the term BHOT, which is Banff Human Organ Transplant Panel, and it was launched commercially yesterday. And it has the key areas of cell-mediated rejection, antibody-mediated rejection, tissue injury, and infection. So the big diagnostic areas are covered in this gene panel of 770 genes, which is a discovery panel. Because we can pick the top 5, but you can pick the next top 5. And this gene panel, which is now out there, and you can order it when you have a NanoString platform, and we decided for the NanoString platform because it works on formalin-fixed paraffin-embedded tissue, as you see here at the bottom of the workflow. You can embed the biopsy, you cut your sections for the standard stains, and you cut extra curls for RNA extraction. You can do the process in parallel. It's a 2-pipetting step, a plug-and-play platform, which even I was once allowed to run an essay, so kind of safe. And then we can facilitate studies across the world using standardized reagents, standardized assessment of these genes, comparable data. And then we can load these data into an interface online with a minimal data set or variable set like Jan introduced for the rules and dissemination, so the Banff scores, how they're done with the molecular phenotype. And the idea is, like Banff has always been, is now that you have a source of doing this at home in your basement, so you don't need to send your biopsies anywhere, you can pick your cases, your research question, and when you upload the data to this open source platform, you're allowed to analyze all data in the platform. It's a little bit like crowdsourcing or crowdfunding of this approach, which Banff has always been. And with that, we hope we will be quickly in a position to validate a refined gene set which has the strongest association with the desired clinical phenotypes or clinical questions like prediction or prognostication. And that will then allow us, first retrospectively, to further validate these 770 genes, and then to enroll them into a prospective trial design. All of you are involved as clinical trialists, and now you have a source you can buy and run as part of that clinical trial in your own lab, or I think the company CareDx picked this up as a service. You can contract them when you don't want to run your own nanostring. They run that for you and give you the results back. So all options are out there, and it is totally open and available from now on. And that is where we stand, and the next action item would be to define the minimal data set for this open data source platform we would like to build then from now on. That's it.
Next is electron microscopy, Candace and Sharon.
Here we go. Is that the right one, Sharon?
This is an update progress report from the Banff EM working group. We have a large group of members from all around the world in our group, and I want to thank them for helping us with all of our little projects since we started. Now, the last time we met in Barcelona, we gave details of some surveys and some findings that we had, and I will summarize these for you just to then bring you up to date and take you into the future as to what we'll be doing next. We looked at what the current EM practices are in the renal transplant study among both practicing renal and transplant pathologists around the world. And what we found is that there's only 38% of centers worldwide that are performing EM on renal allograft biopsies. And a large number of these are in cases where there's proteinuria or where there's a suspicion of glomerulonephritis or recurrent disease. There was also no consensus among the participants for the number of glomerular loops to examine, especially in the diagnosis of early lesions of transplant glomerulopathy. There was no consensus for lesional scoring among participants on what the EM magnification should be to look at peritubular capillaries. How many do you examine? How many loops capillaries do you scope in order to decide what the 3 worst capillaries are for evaluation? We also looked at how well we are recognizing glomerular basement membrane and PTCL lesions using the currently published criteria. And unfortunately, the responses were all over the place. And these are from participants that have been doing evaluations of renal transplant biopsies for more than 10 to 15 years. Most of it was bad and ugly. I won't go into the details, but the responses were varied and they were not very good compared to a group of experts. There were 5 transplant pathologists that do routine EM on all transplant biopsies. Now this becomes important because our group is getting ready to initiate a large multi-center retrospective study. And we're going to be relying on centers to send us biopsies. We'll be asking for a variety of different lesions in both the glomerular and peritubular capillaries to evaluate and correlate with serologic and histologic parameters, look at prognosis and outcomes. And we need them to be using uniform criteria. We need better inter-observer variability in that respect. So instead of sending something out right after the meeting in Barcelona, we wanted to piggyback any kind of an educational incentive endeavor that we had close to the time that we get started with a multi-center study. And we're going to be starting this study right after the beginning of the year. Before that, what we'll do is send a comprehensive teaching module with a pre-test in which we've selected the most problematic lesions that people had identified in the 2017 image survey that we sent out. This will be followed by a mandatory step-by-step teaching module on PTC lesions as well as glomerular basement membrane lesions. There will be detailed explanations for all the currently published criteria using real-life cases that we've collected. And this is aiming to standardize the criteria that we want our participants to use and improve the inter-observer variability. Then we'll have a much larger comprehensive post-test to see how well they did after this step-by-step teaching module. And I'll turn this over to Candace for the rest of our activities.
So just to summarize what our working group had agreed after Banff 2017, we had 4 objectives, which you can see listed here. And Sharon's just talked to you about the inter-observer variability objective, which we're working on. And in the meantime, we've been working on the 2 first ones, which are to put forward a set of recommendations for taking, processing, and reporting EM, and also harmonization of terminology. And we worked on this through a survey of working group members. We received 20 responses, which we've collated, and we've also used what Banff has recommended in the past and simply updated it and refined it a bit on the basis of the feedback that we received. And I don't have in 5 minutes the time to go through all the details of that, but I'll just highlight some elements, and what we're hoping to do is collate these recommendations and then liaise with Banff leadership as to what is the best format to communicate those to everyone else. So the recommendations include recommendations for taking a sample for EM, and there was quite a wide variety of views in the working group, with many thinking that taking a sample for EM and all transplant biopsies would be a tall order for their clinicians, and others thinking that it's important to have them for all transplant biopsies. So we phrased it as saying wherever possible it should be taken for all transplant biopsies, but as a minimum when there's a suspicion of glomerular disease. And one of the members of the working group pointed out that when a sample for EM is taken, we should also recommend that semi-thin total blue sections of that sample be examined in all cases, because they sometimes harbor lesions that we don't see in the light microscopic samples. Then the next step is when do we perform ultrastructural analysis on these samples that have been taken. And without going into the details of the list, again, there was some contradiction between responses from working groups, with some wanting to extend the indications and others wanted to restrict them a bit, so we've tried to find a compromise. Certainly the main line is basically if there's a suspicion of glomerular disease, either clinical or pathological, and if there are any features of antibody-mediated rejection or the patient's at risk of antibody-mediated rejection. And one of the working members also pointed out that EM can be used for non-glomerular disease, and we should always bear that in mind as well. And then the Banff recommendations also said that EM could be useful to look for early changes in transplant glomerulopathy that might prompt DSA testing, so more as a screening tool. But many working group members said that this was probably too much to recommend that we all do because of the volume of work that it would imply, so we simply updated the recommendations to say that it's useful in that respect, but not recommended. We've also issued guidelines for preparing the block for ultrastructural examination. And this, again, led to some discussion amongst members, but on the whole, people agreed that it's useful to include at least 2 glomeruli if possible. And in terms of capturing peritubular capillaries, there's quite a wide variety of experience, with some saying that it's very difficult to get 10 peritubular capillaries for examination. And so we've included recommendations about not trimming the block in order to preserve the peritubular capillaries and to try to have a minimum of 10 of them for examination. Our guidelines for ultrastructural assessment of glomeruli have basically not changed, except that we've made them a little bit more clear in response to feedback. And we've not specified a magnification at which this should be done, because again of the feedback from the working group members that not all use the same magnification. Sort of same thing for the peritubular capillary basement membrane multi-layering. I'd say that there were quite a lot of points of contention here. This is clearly an area where people struggle in terms of how to count the layers around peritubular capillaries. What does it mean to avoid tangentially cut areas? So we've removed that for now because we need to define it a bit clearer. And whether the layers should be circumferential or partial. There's a lot of discussion here. And really, we've laid these rules down, but I think this is a question that has to be answered by the multi-center study rather than by refining guidelines. There was a lot of contention about the numbers of peritubular capillaries to examine. So some wanted more than 10, others wanted less than 10, so we've left it at 10. And then finally, just to finish, we've updated a few definitions. Some of these definitions have been updated because the Renal Pathology Society under Mark Haas has developed definitions that we've just sort of adopted wholesale because it makes sense to use the same definitions as the RPS. And we've changed the word endothelial swelling to hypertrophy in response to several working group members who pointed out that swelling is more of a light microscopic feature. We've also adopted the definition from the RPS for the subendothelial electron-lucent widening. And then there was some discussion about whether we should refer to new glomerular basement membrane, with several other terminologies suggested, such as remodeling or reduplication, but I put the definitions of those words here, and I don't think they, in my opinion, they don't really correspond to what we're seeing. So for the moment, I've left it at layering, subendothelial glomerular basement membrane layering. And so hopefully this harmonization of terminology will help us moving forward to prepare and build on for our multi-center trial.
Thank you very much. Just one point. I think it's very important what was said about examining the 1 micron sections beforehand if you're going to do EM, because we found in a couple of cases that those sections might contain, say, an artery with endarteritis that was not present on the LM specimen, or a glomerulus with glomerulitis. And I think it's important for the pathologist to examine it, because some glomeruli that might be selected by a technologist might not be suitable for EM examination, such as if they're ischemic glomeruli. So I think it's important that the pathologist examine the 1 micron sections. Kim is going to tell us about digital pathology working group. It was a major topic of yesterday's pre-meeting.
Yes, so you heard a lot about this yesterday and many complications and complexities, but I think yesterday's discussion clarified a lot of things. So this does not need to be end-to-end complete and involving every single clinical specimen, and if you put it in that context, that it could be selective and educational, then most centers already favor this approach and are already on board. And I think that's probably the way to look at it, and to think about the link to the electronic health record. So this is the approach that we plan to take rather than getting endlessly into complicated factors which may not be that relevant in the long run. So the usefulness for consultation, personalized precision medicine initiatives is obvious. I mean, this is the logical starting point for AI approaches and many other things. The linkage to the electronic health record is important. And the white paper will proceed on that basis. We're just very happy that we were able to include Yukako's presentation and very intriguing visuals there. Brad Ferris didn't have time, so we're planning to make him the major presenter on Thursday's session, talking about what the first project of the digital pathology Banff working group will be and how that will relate to the white paper. And now I'm thinking that the text in the meeting report or the text in the separate HAT paper and the white paper itself will not be that dramatically different from each other. So that's my brief report on the digital pathology white paper and Banff working group. Questions?
No questions. So we have meetings to go to in 5 to 10 minutes. However, I would suggest that if anybody